Welcome to part two. Is that should we say something?
Yeah, we'll start with welcome to part two and jump straight in. So thank you for everyone who's found this part two video. If you've not watched part one, go and find part one. We've talked about all kinds of stuff, and we've got loads more to talk about. So I'm here with Arty Morty. If you don't know who Arty Morty is, you need to go and watch part one, and he'll explain who he is. But you probably already know who Arty Morty is if you're here. Before we pause there, we're getting into loads of bits, but I'm really keen to talk about. We've touched on a little bit in terms of the different international progression of gender identity and where that's at, and the difference between. We've talked about a few differences between like the US or North America more generally and the UK, but we are now, what are we, the end of April 2022. Where are things in Canada legislatively when it comes to gender identity ideology?
Very, very dire. It's very, very bad. The idea of gender identity ideology, the idea that we should be hostile to biological sex and remove any notions of biological sex from law, is running rampant. It started with the very misleadingly called conversion therapy bill, and it's moved on from there to employment legislation. And what's really, really bad is what's going on with education curricula that are being put forward by the government. The lobby groups are really, really targeting children. They're targeting schools. They're targeting education. It's really, really scary. There's also legislation provincially around custody and things like that around children. So, I mean, across the board, there are so many issues around gender identity ideology. And it's just a full-scale assault. Our government in Canada is a liberal. The Liberal Party of Canada is in charge right now, and they're really gung-ho on quote-unquote woke ideology. You know, across the world, we're seeing this phenomenon across the Western world where sort of left of center political movements are kind of running far to the left. It's become quite shocking. There's kind of a purity spiral going on. This is a phenomenon a lot of people talk about, and it seems nowhere is that more apparent than with gender identity ideology. And Canada always prides itself on being liberal and progressive. You know, we're like the world's goody two shoes.
I was going to say, is it because Canada has an image in the rest of the world and a self-image of we're the nice people, we're going to do the right thing, that this has taken such a hold?
Yeah, we're America's snooty little brother, you know. So that image.
Sorry, I was going to say, have you heard the thing about a Canadian explaining to a Scottish person about like the relationship, and then what was it? There's like the Canadian explaining like with the Scotland is like essentially Scotland, you're like England's Canada, and the Scottish person's like, no, England's our Mexico.
Nice. Sorry. Nice. It is a strange psychological thing being in Canadian, because we're, you know, what was it? Trudeau, the elder Trudeau, the one from the 80s, Pierre Trudeau, not his son, who's the prime minister now. He said something that was like getting into bed with an elephant or something like that. You know, we're just, the United States is this massive, mega, super duper uber power, and we're right next to it, but we're not it. So it's a really strange, we just feel we're overshadowed. We have this massive inferiority complex. And the only way we can assert our identity is to contrast ourselves against America as being more liberal and more progressive. You know, it started with when we got our healthcare. When we universalized healthcare in Canada, I think that's when Canada started to realize that we could really run with this idea that we're sort of more, we have more liberal policies than Americans do. And that's just run away. Now, Canadians are just so complacent with that image. Even conservative Canadians know that we're conservatives, but we're still, you know, the Conservative Party in Canada is called the Progressive Conservatives. You know, they're still progressive, even as conservatives. And that means we just look the other way when anything to do with any kind of progressive sounding issue like gay rights or LGBT rights or whatever, people just like, oh, that sounds good. That's very Canadian. That's wholesome. You know, let it slide. Nobody looks into it. Nobody criticizes it. So it's very, very hard to get the word out. Everybody's been heart-washed that LGBTQIZ is wonderful. And nobody's looking at the dangers of these bills, which are really, really, really dangerous. Yeah.
How much then does Canada? I know you all like sit around and decide together, but how, Canada or policymakers, how much is there a looking to the UK, Scandinavian countries, and like we said about the people who had Scandinavian countries who've kind of gone first in a way with kind of gender clinics and stuff, and are now realizing the mistake that's been made. And then obviously Turf Island here. How much does Canada, as a government or as a what's the word I'm looking for? Not community, but a national identity. Look to the kind of Northern Europe and kind of on this issue particularly.
That's a really interesting question. Canadians absolutely like to consider ourselves almost like Scandinavia in that we're very progressive. But I don't think we pay much attention to what's going on in Scandinavian governments. The UK, on the other hand, Canada is, we're a Commonwealth country. Your queen is our queen. We're a country of Anglophiles. We're very, very, we also distinguish ourselves from the United States by aligning ourselves so much more with the UK than the United States does. So that's why it's so important what's going on Turf Island over there. We used to call it Knife Crime Island because they're all are stabbing each other and bottling each other all the time when we're just shooting each other like proper.
I was going to say, it's better than Gun Crime Island.
But now I call it, now it's Turf Island. I'm so glad what's going on in the UK because that's going to hopefully wake Canada up. But it's not really, honestly, it's not being discussed at all. The only time you hear about this issue is when the CBC mentions, trans kids, some puff story about some trans kid coming out in school or something, It's really horrible. We're trying so hard to get more press attention. And, well, that's not true. There is some, there is a sort of conservative press and a libertarian press that is starting to pick up on this. There's a slightly right-of-center newspaper in Canada called the National Post. It's one of our 3 big national papers. And there are a couple journalists there who have been talking about this, which is good. But the CBC, which is our national, obviously like the BBC, it's very liberal, very progressive, will not go near this issue. Our other liberal media outlets just won't go near it. There's been a little bit of touch in Quebec. I'm not very connected with Quebec. Is so different from English-speaking Canada.
I was going to say, is there a connection with the kind of French-speaking Canada, and do they look to France? Like how strong a connection is there in terms of a European connection?
My sense, I'm not in Quebec, although I have lived in Quebec and I do speak some French. I used to be fully bilingual. Quebec is very, very connected to France. Quebec is very, very, very connected to France. So what's happening in France is going to be heard about in Quebec. France is almost like Quebec's America, whereas Canada's, our media is almost all American. Quebec's media is almost all French. So I think there is some change going on in France. There was a big petition. I think there was wasn't there, but from doctors, some 60 physicians. There's been some gender critical activity going on in France, which is good. And the politics in Quebec are very different than the rest of Canada. They don't have that same kind of they just don't have that same kind of like liberal for liberal's sake, progressive for progressive's sake attitude. So there have been some politicians who've spoken about this. There have been some media pieces about this issue in Quebec. So hopefully there's some hope there, but I can't really speak much Quebec because I'm not there.
The kind of media. So when you said about obviously the CBC and looking at what's happened with the BBC here in the last 6 months to even a year, obviously the Stephen Nolan podcast about Stonewall has been a big thing. They're coming out of the Stonewall Champions scheme as the BBC, their kind of Director General position on political activity for particularly newsy members of staff. But the BBC seeming quite, I mean, lots of people criticize the BBC for like being biased, but both sides of an argument can criticize the BBC for being biased. So in both directions. So it's, I think there's not much there, but how much do you think, or rather looking at the BBC, there's definitely, it's not that everyone there agrees with it or believes it. It's that that's been the culture you have to go along with, and now less so. So there are reports that are talking about this. There's even there's a story on the website today or this week about a 13-year-old trans-identifying child who has been offered use the girls' toilets at school, use the boys' toilets at school, or will use unisex toilets at school, and none of those are good enough because they want a trans-specific toilet. And it's kind of, part of me wonders, like, is there somebody at the BBC who has put that story through because they know that's going to pique people.
Yeah.
You know, like photo editors, when you have a photo editor for in their broadsheets that are like, the story's this, but we're going to put a really bad picture of that person, or a picture that tells more of a story than the words. I feel like there's that at the BBC, where the story's not getting put on because they are, you know, there are people there who aren't just going along with it. How much, in terms of as a national broadcaster or media in general in Canada, it's like with the Guardian here, not everyone at the Guardian believes it, but that's the culture going along with it.
And you could almost protest quietly within it by like, yeah, if you're a photo editor who has to have a photo to accompany a trans puff piece, you could pick a photo that sort of undermines the piece if it's
story that's about true in the BBC. Exposed her penis, you can very clearly make sure the picture shows that the trans woman is you can tell it's male very easily. Male. But is that what's the kind of media, both the CBC and media coverage in general of this in Canada? Is it going along with it?
No, it's very much. Remember, we were talking in part one about how like there are some people who see this as an immersive fiction, and some people who see this as a truth, and some people who just profess to. I think in Canada, we're just everybody's professing to truly believe, although they don't truly believe. We're not at that point yet. You know, we kind of, over the last few years, we were drifting into this idea that this is just an extension of gay rights, and gay rights is well established. So this is just the norm now. This isn't a controversy to be discussed. You know, hashtag no debate. This is just, it's natural to be, you know, it's not a political position to say that that trans women are women. It's just a natural position. We were drifting into that all around the world. And then we're seeing in the UK that there's been so much pushback against that now the BBC is starting to at least a little bit recognize that this is controversial. This isn't just a default central position. This is a neutral position, rather. This is something that needs to be discussed, and there has to be discussion about that. That's happening in the UK a little bit. It's starting to. In Canada, it's just not, at least not at the CBC. There were nowhere near that point. I just saw a puff piece today mentioning, you know, trans kids, as if that's a thing. The CBC would never go near the suggestion that it's not the neutral default, you know, valid position that trans people are literally the opposite sex. You know, we've drifted so far into this. You know,
mentioning the fiction, actually, I thought of it when we were talking about it in part one, and then we went on to something else. But the idea of the legal fiction as well, I think. So I'm not, and you can probably talk about in terms of what the situation is in Canada. But so obviously we have the Gender Recognition Act in the UK. It's very clearly talking about a legal fiction. So for those who aren't familiar with the GRA, and I'm by no means an expert, but it's essentially for trans-identified people who have lived for 2 years in their acquired gender and can change the details on forms and stuff so that they are legally recognized as the opposite sex because of their acquired gender. And there's confusion around the interchange of using sex or gender, because back then they were pretty much interchangeable.
Gender was just a polite way of saying sex. You know, like if you're filling out a form in an office, you don't want to say the word sex because it says sex, and sex means sex. It makes you think about fucking. So you say gender because you want to be polite. And that's really kind of one of the other confluences of this, is that the language was already addled and confused. So that just added to the fire of this whole mess. But anyway, sorry, go on. That's the digression.
But it's nobody was saying these people are literally the opposite sex. It's a legal fiction to facilitate coping with this and making life easier for a very small number of people. I think it's the people seem to have either let go of or never understood in the first place, if they're new to it or younger, that you can have a legal fiction. There are a number of things that I can't remember who's written on it now that I've read recently or in the last year about what are the legal fictions we have. But that I mean, where is that in terms of self-ID and understanding in Canada in terms of the concept of, you might legally be one thing and you might be recognized and have rights as one thing, but you're not physically and biologically. It doesn't make a change. Like how much?
I'm not like, it's so funny. I'm not, even though I am co-founder of the LGB Alliance Canada, which lobbies for a political change, I'm not super. I have to do better in understanding the minutiae of our legal situation. So I'm embarrassed to say you've caught me in a little bit of a weak spot there. But we do have something like de facto self-ID. Self-ID is not quite explicitly laid out in the law, but there is a law that more or less enshrines it in a kind of roundabout way. So we have a kind of de facto self-ID. Self-ID, for those of you somehow who don't know, it just means you can declare whether you're trans or not, whether you're male or female, and everybody is legally obligated to play along. This is another thing that a lot of newbies don't realize, is that, like, if somebody's telling you, you don't get to choose whether you believe someone telling you whether they're trans or not. Even if you believe that there is a thing called trans, if you believe that some people have a legitimate claim to wanting to live in the legal fiction as the other sex, if you go that far, and I know a lot of feminists don't, for very, very absolutely understandable reasons, and even I have so many caveats when I acknowledge someone's transsexualism, you know. But at least I acknowledge that there are some people who have legitimate dysphoria, who are trying to live, you know, who are trying to make some kind of significant change to their appearance that has some significant impact on the way that they're perceived and the way that they move through the world, blah, 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 blah. At least I can choose whether I believe someone's claim to being trans or not. But with self-ID, that means even transsexuals themselves have to, you know, take anyone's claim at face value. This is really dangerous in prisons. In Canada, in Canada, men can just declare themselves to be women, and prisoners can, and be moved into the female estate, to be moved into the women's prison system, which is far different. This is a huge impact on women prisoners, and it's really scary because women prisoners don't have a voice in the media. They don't get paid attention to. They're a very, 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 very vulnerable population. I know we're drifting away from gay men's interests here a little bit, but it's really fucking important that gay men start paying attention to what's going on with women. You know, really, really important that gay men pay attention to what's going on with women's rights in this issue.
And I've got at least one, potentially two future interviewees specifically talking about the situation in prisons, because very well versed in it. So do go and look at other videos and see if that's there yet if you're watching this, because yeah, that's a really, I don't think most people have a good perception of prison, a clear understanding of what prison actually is like, because it's not like on TV, or depending on what show you're watching, but gay men less so, and gay men less so of women's prison particularly.
Except we all watched Oz a lot because that show was hot. So we know a little bit about prison, because we were all hot for, what was the name of that guy who was on the star of the show again? I forget his name.
I've seen clips and I've not watched. It's not a series I kind of got into yet. So
I didn't get super into it, but I watched clips here and there because that main guy was very sexy. There was a lot of man-on-man prison sex.
You mentioned the LGB Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure most people will be aware of this, but just do a quick explanation of what that is and why that is.
Well, I am only involved in the LGB Alliance Canada, which is a very, very small group compared to the extraordinary work that Bev Jackson and Kate Harris and their associates are doing in the United Kingdom with what we call the mothership. But yeah, we're an organization, LGB Alliance Canada. We're trying to represent homosexual and bisexual Canadians, and our interests are right now primarily around stopping gender identity ideology. Almost all of the gay rights organizations throughout Canada have completely abandoned gays and lesbians and bisexuals in favor of gender identity ideology. And they're so hostile to our rights. They literally say things like, you shouldn't use the word homosexual anymore. They're downgrading that word. And they're shaming us for being exclusively same-sex attracted, at least lesbians and gays, not bisexuals. And that's just, we can't stand for that. And what's being done in the education sector is what we're focusing on primarily right now, because that, I think, is the biggest fight. We lost our fight to stop the conversion therapy bill, but we put up a good fight, and we educated a lot of people, and we piqued a lot of people along the way, and we got the interest of a little bit of media, and we got the interest of some politicians fighting our horrible conversion therapy bill, which is not a conversion therapy bill. It's a bill to ensure that children who are gender nonconforming get routed onto transsexualism. But yeah, the education curriculum, what's going on in the education sector in Canada is our primary focus right now, because it's ground zero for this in Canada. They're indoctrinating an entire generation of kids into the idea that sex doesn't exist, and therefore homosexuality doesn't exist. And the side effect of that, of course, is that gender nonconforming kids who are naturally feminine boys or naturally masculine girls, are going to think that they're really in the wrong body, that they're actually trans. And then they're going to end up having sex change surgeries and medical stuff done to their bodies that's going to have a huge negative medical impact on them that is not necessary.
What's the what is the kind of the charity campaigning lobbying landscape? Like, who's your Stonewall? And like, so here in terms of size, I mean, I don't know what it is now. So I used to be chair of trustees for the LGBT consortium more than a decade ago, and I know we had conversations in the sector then, if you exclude HIV charities and put them in the health category, the other kind of LGBT charities, Stonewall, funding wise anyway, there's Stonewall, there's 3 or 4 others, and then there's like everyone else that has no money. So it's a massively, you know, disproportionately representative in terms of the amount of charities, but obviously was the predominant thing for LGB. What's the kind of, and they're all,
yeah, we don't have, yeah, that's the United Kingdom is very like mononucleated. There's the big nucleus, which is Stonewall. Canada's not like that at all. Canada as a country is so spread out. You have to understand geographically, we're so broad, and we even have 2 different language speaking populations. More than that, if you include a lot of indigenous languages, of course, and immigrant communities with all their own languages, blah, blah, blah. It's a spread out country with so many, it's like several different countries in one. Canada's more of an idea than a nation. You know, it doesn't have a real coherent identity. It just has a sort of set about values, which means we don't have a central gay rights organization at all. We have a bunch of local community ones of varying sizes. But you could almost argue that a group called EGAL, which originated, I believe, in Montreal, but it seems to have its formal headquarters in Toronto, to my shock. Égal, of course, is French for equality or equal. That is probably the biggest one. I think that's the one that gets the biggest funding. So that is almost analogous to Stonewall, but it's really spread out. It's really splintered, and it's really local community. It's on the municipal level that each individual city has its own small local gay rights organization. I guess another reason we don't really have a national body for lobbying is that being so close to the United States, we just use theirs, because the United States has HRC, Human Rights Campaign, and ACT UP and things, which is more AIDS, but HIV, sorry. But so we don't really have a centralized one, which makes it kind of harder because we have to convince everybody separately.
I'm going to say is the driver then actually the American agenda and organizations in the way Stonewall and some of the larger groups here, and actually even the non-LGBT groups that are kind of going along with the woke stuff, is that you've got that driver from America and USA rather than that's affecting Canada.
Yeah. So it's a strange landscape. So far, we're just kind of more doing our own thing, trying to do our own outreach and reach people. What's really interesting is that, like I was saying in part 1, how gay people in our real lives, what our beliefs are and how we generally feel about the trans phenomenon and gender identity ideology doesn't at all jive with the activist movement in the woke community. So we're finding there are more and more gay men and lesbians especially reaching out to us and following us on social media and engaging with gender identity ideology. And I hope that continues. I think it's really shocking that our gay rights organizations, which are still necessary, have just completely abandoned us. And there's almost a complete disconnect between the values and the lifestyle of gays and lesbians in the real world. I don't know if lifestyle is the right right word, but our lives, our experiences is, I guess, the word I want to say, and what is being represented by these activist organizations. They've just completely, they're in their own little world that has no bearing. I walk down the main strip, the gay village in downtown Toronto, and the activity I see, the attitudes of the people I see just is completely different than if I were to walk into the Central Community Center in Toronto, which is called the 519, which is like woke central, which pushes gender identity ideology. These are just 2 completely different worldviews, you know, and politicians need to understand that, because politicians are giving so much money to all these little lobby groups, and the municipalities are giving all this money to these lobby groups and these activist organizations, and they don't realize that these activist organizations are not representing gays. So all of this financial and political support that's supposed to be going to gays and lesbians is being diverted to a entirely separate political movement, and we aren't getting any representation. So it's really important that politicians in Canada start paying attention to us, LGB Alliance Canada, because we are the only organization that stands up for the the rights of gays and lesbians. We represent the values of gays and lesbians and bisexuals.
Yeah, but I think it's that, like when you mentioned the politicians, it's that they aren't going to go out and do the research. They want the quick answer, the person in the right position. And that's why you do lobbying. And that's what Stonewall was really effective at, and that's part of how it grew to be biggest in terms of funding and reputation, is because they didn't go in with rainbows and flowers and unicorns. They had very professional, business-like, black and red kind of, and prior to that there's obviously other colors, but that was the era I kind of got involved in. But the reports they presented were, it's very like, here's the information, here's the research. It's presented in a way that government ministers and civil servants and stuff received lobbying information. That's how they built that reputation, and they were really effective at that. And that's then put them in that position of, oh, tick, we know we can trust whatever they say, and so we just listen to whatever they say.
Yeah,
that kind of slightly, well, not slightly, very lazy from a point of view of the politician's point of view and their advisor's point of view, is we'll go to the official voice of that group / community, and aren't hearing the like you say, it's a very different thing from what's in the community centres to what you actually talk to people on the street or see going on in terms of day-to-day life amongst LGBT people.
That's right. It's interesting. I'm thinking about the charity sector, or the progressive charity sector in general, how this is really a problem. There needs to be a paradigm shift, because what's happened over the last 30, 40, 50 years is that civil rights movements have gained momentum. They've gained traction. This was an underdog movement. Civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, minority rights, anti-racism. This was all an underdog movement for a long time. And now it's not. Now it's in the mainstream. And that means that all these organizations that fought for these rights, I'm thinking of the American Civil Liberties Union, which has fallen disgracefully into disarray. I'm thinking of organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is mockingly been called the Poverty Palace, because they do exactly that. They lobby themselves, they market themselves as the anti-racism lobby, but they're really just a money-making machine that's not really interested in the causes that it supposedly advocates for. It's just a machine for generating money. And I'm seeing that happening across the progressive charity sector now. They haven't adapted, and they're kind of becoming corrupted, it seems. I don't know what the right word is, but there has to be a total paradigm shift where we recognize that these civil rights movements have shifted. The landscape of politics in the Western world has shifted. And you can't just throw money at these organizations and expect them to solve your problems or something.
That shift in beyond these issues, the shift in politics to the both identity politics and that kind of extreme them and us, and the has the political spectrum shifted, and I'm still where I am because of extremes, and it's happened in both directions. I think first it's kind of gone to, I know again probably people have heard me say this, but Bill Maher did some stuff a long while ago about how as the right moved further right, the left in America anyway kind of tried to move to the center to find a middle ground, and so the right just moved further right, and so the center moves further right, and actually now it's like the progressive left is swinging that back to the crazy extreme, and actually the people at large or individually generally, their views probably haven't changed very much on that previous spectrum of political views, but where the extremes have.
I think it's the Overton window you're talking about. There's a great cartoon that Colin Wright. Do you know this guy Colin Wright?
He's on the little cartoon with the
with the sort of the political spectrum where he's like he was left of the center, and then 20 years ago, and then 10 years ago, he's still in his same political position, but where the left is and where the right is and where the middle in between them has shifted. So now he's in the middle and not left of the center. And then today, the left has just gone so far to the left that the center line, the median between a far left position and a far right position, is so far on the left that he is to the right of the center, but he hasn't actually changed his positions at all. And this was retweeted by Elon Musk, apparently.
But I think where the change in the spectrum and where people are and the extremes has changed, but also the all or nothingness of the extremes of it in the tribalness and the there's a progressive woke. We're just going to label everything as right wing because it's hateful, and if right wing equals bad. And in this kind of gender debate, it's you're funded by the Christian right, or there's no understanding of the complexities of different. Two people can agree on one thing and disagree on another thing, but the more recent or younger political generations are more, you have to agree with everything or you're out, or you have to agree with nothing, we're out. I think that shift in terms of how politicians then engage with the kind of campaigning and lobbying organizations shifts, because those groups are no longer trying to present, here's actual information, we want you to understand nuance. It's just are you with us or against us?
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's been a whole collapse. Like there's no nuance, and everybody is performing their position on the political spectrum. Nobody's thinking about what they actually believe. Nobody's having actual dialogue and discussion. It's all pure performance. It's all pure, I'm part of the tribe. The tribe's running so far to the left, and so am I. And if you're not with us, get out. And I see that there's a little bit of that going on the right too. Like Trumpism is just running the other way too. So there's almost like there used to be a yin and a yang between liberals and conservatives. And they've just that sort of symbiosis, is that the word, has fallen apart, and they're both running in opposite directions. And I feel like probably like political scientists and historians could say this is usually a phenomenon that happens right before like a horrible dictatorship takes hold or something, before civilization collapses.
Yeah, it is. I think it's several people, but again, Bill Maher's definitely talked about this recently, that whole, you want the left and right wing in what we used to understand as the left and right wing needed each other, in that you needed some people who are like trying to push everything ahead, but you don't want to go too fast, too far, and others who are like, keeping hold of the good stuff and being a bit more conservative, but if you only had that, you'd never move anywhere. So it's having those two, the tension of those two actually moves us forward. I think in terms of the kind of gay male, particularly, angle on it is you can just be, you're the wrong kind of gay now. And obviously this week we've seen it with the wrong kind of lesbian, but for gay men, straight gay man, you may as well be, a white gay man, you might as well be a straight man in terms of woke politics. Like we're just mainstream, we're part of the patriarchy, we're not. I think this is part of we're going to label it as queer, or we're going to come up with all these other labels because we need to be seen as different, because now if you're just a gay man, particularly if you're white, you're just part of the establishment now.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can be one kind of gay. If you're in America, if you're Republican and gay, less so here. If you're a Tory and gay, you're the wrong kind of gay. Can we have your gay pass back, please? I don't think you should be allowed anymore, kind of thing. And obviously in America, there's also if you're black and Republican, how it was a similar thing previously and ongoing, but came around first. Is like, if you're how can you be black and Republican? And now it's if you're gay and right wing, or even right of center and gay, you're on the wrong side.
Yeah, this is, it's two things. One, this goes back to the whole idea of gay being an identity and not being a sexual orientation. Yep. And it's also like a political stance. It's not a political stance. I'm a homosexual because I like dick. That's why I'm gay. It's not because I'm progressive. It's not because I have a queer haircut. It's because I like dick. That's what makes me gay at the end of the day. What else was I going to say? I forgot the other thing. Shit.
So saying about the wrong kind of gay and the kind of the taking a political position. I think the being gay was political when we didn't have equal marriage. And
this is all pretty interesting for me watching all this. This is what I was going to say. That's right, because I consider myself very much on the left still. I've always been super lefty, and I've always been really hostile to the right. I was very kind of I was pretty activisty, pretty social justice-y, to use the more modern parlance. So it's really interesting myself realizing that I have to understand that there was a yin and a yang, and there was a need for conservatives to counterbalance some of the more extreme tendencies of liberals. And there's a need to recognize that it's okay to be a Black Republican. It's okay to be a gay conservative. We need these voices too. I don't necessarily agree with these things. And sometimes I'm outright repulsed by some things that these right-wing conservative parties do. But I'm starting to see that I'm outright repulsed by some of the things that parties on the progressive side do too. So, you know, and it's just a healthier world when we have dialogue. I've met so many people who are conservative, so many people who maybe didn't used to be conservative, but have become conservative also because of the madness of what's going on in politics right now, but also people who are just generally conservative. And I have respectful and very enlightening dialogue with these people. You know, I genuinely, truly respect and value their voices, and I learn from them, even though I don't necessarily agree with them. It's just a healthier world when we talk to each other.
That's the thing that's missing generally in kind of political discourse, but especially in the gay community, LGBT, even if we as broad as that, is the you don't have to agree with people. You can be friends with people and have political differences, disagreements, religious disagreements or differences. It feels like it's not just that you're the wrong kind of gay, it's that you can't be a different kind of gay anymore. You have to be, like, again, it's that all or nothing. It's kind of it's almost beyond tribalism.
I think it's a sign that everybody's scared, because when people start, you know, chasing out witches, and when these purity spirals start, it's because they don't want to get pushed out. You know, it's almost like when a stampede starts. You know, something can trigger it, and then everybody starts running. You know, something triggers that. We're going to start pushing up people who aren't politically pure enough. I better demonstrate that I'm not, and push the person behind me out. You know, and then it's just kind of a self-fulfilling thing. It turns into a spiral. We're seeing this all across the political spectrum right now. It's really scary.
Yeah. I think it's also made me think about I think we kind of touched on some of this earlier as well, but the social media definitely, but media generally, and the curation of what things should be, and what, like, we had gay stereotypes in the media in the past, but actually now it's not just that there's a gay stereotype, there's the media portrayal of the right way to be gay, or what's accepted by the mainstream. So I'm thinking of kind of RuPaul's Drag Race as kind of defined for a lot of people what drag is, who had never heard of or had any interaction or association with drag. You know, even having been to a pantomime and seen a man playing Widow Twankey, you know, but that, because that's the dominant media portrayal of it, that's seen as being, that's what drag is. And it's like, that's as far from what drag is for some people as you could be, but that's the authority on what it is because of the media portrayal of it. I don't know. I don't know what I did watch Drag Race Canada, and I think that was the last Drag Race I watched. I
certainly didn't. I probably knew a lot of those people, but I don't watch that show. I'm not a fan of drag. I'm not like politically opposed to drag, but I recognize that it's a controversial issue around very much. You know, I do my very, very best to learn as much as I can from women in this movement. I'm learning so much. I've always been surrounded by feminists. My mother is a radical feminist. You know, so I'm familiar with a lot of feminism, but I'm learning every day, and I'm listening always. Drag is an interesting and controversial one. Jane Claire Jones has some very interesting views on drag. She's obviously a feminist philosopher, but she also sees drag as something that she approves of. A lot of women don't. They see it as mockery of femininity, and I don't know how to parse that. I'm just not sure where I stand on it. But personally, I'm just not all that interested in drag. I've seen so many fucking drag shows, you know. I've seen probably 10,000 drag performances, and I just don't get much out of it. You know, I like gender bending performance and play, and I like body humor and all that stuff, you know. Dirty jokes are fun always.
I think that's, as you described it there, I think that's the difference for me is, and it kind of links back to the, you know, the how RuPaul's Drag Race portrays this is what drag is in the same way there's a trans umbrella, there's actually lots of different things. We're using drag to mean a lot of different things. And at the one end, it's a massive overlap with trans. It's not, I mean, and for me, it never has been that. It's been the gender bending performance of a character, either the kind of, I guess, 70s, 80s, into 90s, the female impersonator. So they're doing the best to look like Barbara Streisand, and it's a musical thing, and it's a, you know, not even a, there's not any banter and comedy with it. It's just the female impersonator doing the singing sort of drag. Or there's the pantomime, both, you know, the men playing the wicked stepmother, or a woman playing like Peter Pan, you know, to play the young boy. There's both ways around in terms of drag performance from a theatrical point of view. And that's kind of a, and even the, like, I've been to drag performances in London a decade ago, having come from a city where the drag was very like northern, in a looking as feminine as possible, to then seeing an East London drag that's like, you've got a beard and you're like you're not even making an effort. But equally, none of those people thought they were not the sex they were. Whereas the RuPaul's Drag Race end of it now, particularly with the number of contestants that seem to have gone on to become trans, or started out even as trans, and even most recently, or was it last year, a trans man, a woman who portrays as a man in a competition portraying a female character.
Oh my god, this name is Egan's Tale.
That's where that for me is where I kind of can see definitely see the feminist or not feminist women. I know there are women who don't use the label feminist, but would have the view of drag is woman face, and I definitely would agree with that when it's that end. Like I think the trans men fetishizing gay men, it's women fetishizing gay men who want to be trans men. There's an element of that I find, I don't really care about being offended. I think everyone has the right to be offended, but I think it links into that conversion therapy thing we were talking about earlier, with the teaching gay men how to give oral sex to females who present as men. that kind of, I think that in the broader media awareness of drag, because of things like RuPaul's Drag Race, that's definitely the problematic, to use an awful wokey word, but like that I definitely get. I think the talking about, for me anyway, talking about drag, having known drag in a theatrical kind of origin, kind of a different thing. I think that, and there's by no means, there's definitely misogynistic elements to that kind of performance, but it's not in and of itself trying to portray themselves. They actually are.
A lot of drag comes from the fact that gay men tend very often to be very gender nonconforming. We tend to have naturally feminine traits, or that would be considered stereotypically feminine, whatever language you want to use. We know that, that is true. And we experience a lot of discrimination and distress about it. And this is a way to express ourselves and say, look, society is asking us to be a man, and we don't necessarily relate to that. We can perform and deconstruct to get a Butlerian, but I'm really being Jane Claire Jonesian, because that's her perspective on drag, is that there's a sense of riffing a little bit on gender and sex and stereotypes, and that's something that's very interesting. But always I have that cautious eye that a lot of women can be very upset and bothered by. The other thing about RuPaul's Drag Race is that is the #1 show for gay men. That is a show for gay men. Drag is gay culture, the gay men's show. If you're trans and you're going on that show, there's a sort of implicit acknowledgement that you're not a woman, that you're a gay man, but it's down to that whole thing where it's like you're conceding that you're a gay man by going into these gay male spaces like Grindr or RuPaul's Drag Race. But then what you're really doing is you're asking us to to play along with your immersive fiction, you know? Just like if you're, when you go on Grindr and you see that there's some people who call themselves CD, which is cross-dresser, and some people call themselves trans, the only difference is that one of them acknowledges that they're really male up front, and the other one is kind of asking you to play a politeness and to role play with them, That's really what this is. It's so strange that this has become a political thing where we have to take this role play and use it as a shibboleth to demonstrate our virtue to everyone else,
I don't think RuPaul's Drag Race is a gay man's show or a show for gay men. I think it's a show, like commercially, it's a show for teenage and 20-something women. Like that's the audience. it's
Yeah, it's pretty broad. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point.
I think it's the same as I talked to Sal about this in terms of the gay bar. There was a drag cabaret bar in Lincoln, and going from people are coming and laughing with us to hen nights are coming in and laughing at us. The audience became, it's not a gender bending, playing with stereotypes, performancey thing. It's something else. I think that's where RuPaul's Drag Race has gone. But I think the misogyny in drag of the theatrical end of the stuff is actually the misogyny that's in stand-up and the misogyny that's in other non-drag stuff. I don't think it's misogynistic because it's drag. I think it's those sorts of jokes are misogynistic whether you're wearing a dress to tell them or not. I definitely have a problem with that in the same way. Although that's then comedy evolves, and like things that would have been funny and acceptable 20, 30, 40 years ago, we wouldn't put on television now. We can understand them in there. It was a different time. Doesn't make it right, but we can understand why our perception of it has changed because we've evolved on it, I guess. So it's gone off in a very philosophical.
This has been a long discussion about drag. I haven't thought this much about drag in a long time, but it's interesting to talk about it.
It's been having had the one gay bar in Lincoln, and then for a while 2 gay bars in Lincoln were drag cabaret bars when I was at university. That's kind of I've been to a couple of gay bars before that, but that was kind of the gay scene that I knew initially. So yeah, knew a lot then. But now then it's been nothing for ages, and then it's kind of, I didn't watch RuPaul's Drag Race for the first few seasons. A flatmate got me into it for like season, I think 6 and 7, and then I watched the UK one because it was new, and then it was like it's not an actual competition. Like we knew this, but then you realize it's reality TV competition. It's a reality TV show. They're a cast. They've decided what's going to happen. And same with Canada.
They've got assistants setting up when they're doing their performances. That's all been staged by by the assistants.
And then the woman saying she's a gay man in the most recent American series was the final straw for me. I think this is the other thing that gay men need to get. I know we touched on it a little bit with the Davey Wavy video in part 1, but it's conversion therapy of you are being told to accept that this woman who says she's a gay man is a gay man, not just that they're a man, but that they're a gay man. And it's like, that's the thing I think most gay men who haven't peaked don't get, because there isn't the physical threat in the way there is for a woman with a man saying that he's lesbian. It's a very different kind of threat, but it's no less a threat on your, not validity, but like it's an attack on same-sex sexual orientation as much. It doesn't have the physical threat. There are physical elements to it in terms of the leaflet from whoever it was, NHS, that was advising trans men how to go to gay saunas and not get found out. And it's like that new homophobia.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, it took me years too to figure this out. Yeah, like I've always trying to be, for years I was trying to be nice to everybody, be nice, right? I went to Berlin a few years ago, and Berlin's wild place, and I had just broken up with my husband, so I was trying to have fun, So I went to a very seedy, leathery bar. I probably shouldn't say this on camera, but I don't care. It's an interesting story. And then I was like, I had a couple drinks, and I decided to go into the dark room in the back. All of us gay men know those back room where anonymous sexual encounters can take place in the dark, in a like labyrinth type environment. And I was like, that's not normally my thing. I'm kind of a old school romantic, monogamous, boring gay. But this was Berlin, just got divorced. Let's go crazy. And I'm walking around and you can't see anything. It's very dark. And I'm standing, and there's this sort of a room, and I'm just leaning against the wall, and I can sort of hear sounds, and this is all very interesting. And I realized there's a man standing next to me, and everyone else is staying far away. And I thought, is it me? Am I just really ugly? And I realized the person standing next to me is a female. This is Berlin. It's super woke. It's super progressive. So they're letting women go into these sex rooms, which normally wouldn't have been a thing that was reasonable. And I was so frightened. And I was telling myself in that moment, she's slowly creeping towards me, slowly starting to put her hand on my shoulder, and I'm like frozen because I'm deeply uncomfortable. I'm 100% homosexual, But I was trying to tell myself that it's virtuous to let this, if this person claims to be a man, and if this person's in a gay man's sex den, then I'm supposed to let this happen. And I got so scared. And then this person, but I felt so guilty. I was trying to tell myself I should let this happen.
Yeah.
And that is, and then she made a grab at my crotch and I just bolted the hell out of there. And I felt bad about it for the longest time, and it's only recently where I processed that, where I'm like, no, I'm gay. That was a woman. I shouldn't have felt guilty. I didn't have any obligation to try to let a woman have sex with me, or fool around with me or whatever. I totally shouldn't have gone along with that. But a lot of men are doing that. A lot of men are telling themselves, and they're being told everywhere, that you have an obligation at least to try, Yeah. No, we don't. We have our boundaries. We have our comfort zones. If we want to choose to, that's fine. But that word choice, it erases the fact that there's coercion involved. You may say that you're choosing to, but you're choosing to try because you're under so much social pressure. It's the good, virtuous thing to do. You should be examining your genital preferences. You should be thinking about trying to have sex with members of the opposite sex. This is homophobia all over again. This is just old school homophobia repackaged, and it's coming directly from gay rights organizations. Gay rights organizations around the West are all saying this. They're telling gay men, learn to like pussy.
And I think it's going to be interesting, it'll be interesting to see if this is one of the things that moves things. Is so I've only been to Berlin. I've been to Berlin once or twice, but I
did
know,
you go to the back room? I'm kidding. Sorry.
I was there with the guy I'm now with. So so he has lived in Berlin, and I know some other people who live in Berlin. I have been told about one of the kind of well-known kind of gay male-only nightclub nights in Berlin, where there's a female club promoter from the UK who runs male-only or men-only gay nights, and she went along to scope out this thing in Berlin. And I mean, there's a little bit of a "don't you know who I am" situation at the door, I think, as I'm told. But the door staff were like, you're a woman, you're not coming in. This is a men's only event. I don't care that you run a men's only event, you're not coming in. So it's interesting to hear that has changed. If Berlin, with the reputation it has as a city, is allowing women into male-only spaces like saunas and whatever.
Some of them. You could see how it's splintering. You could see if sort of queerness and wokeness is making everybody pretend that sex doesn't exist on one side of the gay bars, the super hardcore ultra leatherman bars are going to go exactly the other direction.
And it'd be interesting to see the commercial fallout and how long, like, there are half a dozen gay saunas in London. If they all start letting women in, or if some of them start letting women in and some of them don't, which ones are going to lose business?
Yeah, that's just it. In Canada, the saunas officially say that they do let females in, because they don't discriminate. But they're all terrified because they know that gay men do not. If they're going to have casual sex in an orgy type situation, they don't want women around. They absolutely don't. We have to talk about this. It's maybe uncomfortable to our straight watchers that gay men tend to get into orgies sometimes and go to public bars and have sex with each other, but that's what happens, and we don't want women around. It's very, very uncomfortable. So I feel almost bad for the saunas in Toronto, because they have to publicly state that they let women in, but they know that that's just not right. That's not what their clientele wants, and it'll destroy their business if women start showing up.
It'd be interesting to see if that's the thing that drives any change in, because the lobbyists for letting women into those male-only spaces wouldn't ordinarily be promoting those sorts of male spaces. There may be a kind of a safe sex campaign type route for some of them.
Yeah, bring a bag of condoms.
The interaction with that kind of male-only space, and even nightclubs, not even necessarily specifically sex spaces, but like nightclubs like Fire that have various nights in London that they're not sex nights or anything like that. But it's a very stereotypical. It's men with their t-shirts off dancing and
the shirtless circuit party situation.
Those sorts of things, which I think there are some of those that are they're definitely targeted as male only. Whether or not they would would have discouraged women from entering, or whether women would even have wanted to go. It's very like it's not like a gay bar or gay pub where it's a mix of people and there's probably some straight people there, and it's so yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens commercially for those sorts of businesses. Very easy to pull your adverts out of a free gay magazine and get it shut down. But actually, if your clientele don't come because you're letting women into a male-only space, that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think there will be there is going to be just naturally, you know, the invisible hand of the sex market is going to say, no, we're going to want male-only spaces as we're gay. You know, it's a bit like it's just not going to work, you know, like we were saying in part one. A billion years of evolution. We know what biological sex is. And as homosexuals, that means we're same-sex attracted, monosexual. We know what women are. And if spaces are going to start getting both ways, people will try for a while if they're being told politically this is the right thing to do, but this isn't going to stick unless it's enforced, like in a fascist regime where you're enforced that you have to pretend and then go into the underground and back into the closet again, which is what it's starting to feel like. It's not going to happen. You know, so these organizations, these gay rights organizations like Stonewall, their days are absolutely numbered as long as they hold on to gender identity ideology, because gay people just don't buy it. We know that a trans man isn't a man. You know, we know the difference between a female and a male. We can have respect for trans men. We can have respect for people who are experiencing gender dysphoria, but sex is about biological sex. And there's just no changing that. And it's such a staggering betrayal of gay people to deny that our sex is about our sex, you know?
I think that's the so if anyone's already watched it, I did an interview with Simon Fanshawe, who's one of the founders of Stonewall, and talked about I talked with him about the betrayal of the legacy of the first 2 decades of Stonewall. It's not just that charities like Stonewall and Stonewall in particular have taken on this new agenda. They're doing it in a way that, or what they're doing damages the legacy and the people they were there for in the first place.
Yeah. What do you think it's going to be like getting out of this? I mean, we can see there's just no way. Everybody's joined Scientology, the gender Scientology. This is going to end at some point, unless it's enforced, you know, at gunpoint, and it's not going to be. But there's going to be a monumental reckoning. What do you think it's going to look like?
Well, I think there's I think there's not going to be one big thing that ends stuff. It's going to be there's some big cases like Alison Bailey's case and those sorts of things. There's going to be some big turning points in terms of like the caste review and the recommendations that come out of that. And now obviously we've had the health minister here announce a kind of inquiry into gender identity more generally outside of the caste review. So I think those sorts of things will be turning points. I think everything else is going to be gradual, the kind of dripping and gradual peaking of more people seeing stuff with a couple of milestones where it's, you know, either medical or children or schools or those sorts of things. Sadly, it's not going to be women, because if it was women, then it would have happened. And it's a sad reflection that I'm wanting.
Well, in the UK, women are really organizing well, and they're doing an amazing job. In the UK, it's women.
But I don't think that's what's going to change people's minds. Sadly, I think the fact that I'm needing and thinking we need to have conversations about how do we get men to listen, because it's the men in decision-making places that are going to need to understand this, and for them to listen, men are going to have to talk to them, because they're the kind of men who won't listen to anyone other than men, or won't hear.
Yeah.
I think
gay men are in such a good position because we're men, and we're the new straight white men, apparently. But also being gay, being within the LGBT, this is really helping to break the idea that we're a unified bloc. Yes. We need gay men to realize that this is a threat to ourselves so that we can start speaking up. And then we can help other people who are in serious danger, like women and girls whose rights are just being ripped apart around this, you know? Yeah. So it's really, really important, and for freedom of speech and for all of the other issues that impact the whole world.
I think there's not going to be, I'm not bothered in terms of the reckoning, in terms of like I'm not fussed about having like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Like it's there are people who we can put the bridge out to allow them to walk it back, and if they do, that's fine. There are other people who we are going to know what they've said, and they're not going to work again, or they're not going to work in the same way again once, you know, certain things break, and it may take a while. I'm not fussed about making them pay or making a big deal of that. It's like, I'd rather
just want to get on with this. Yeah.
Well, we've got a generation of kids who are going to be detransitioning, and that's where I think that's the future of the LGB sector's work, is actually supporting the detransitioners who have been.
And that's horrible, because the very organizations that are the former gay rights organizations like Stonewall are the people that coaxed these kids into transitioning, that were participating in this movement. They can't turn around and become the ones supporting them to get out of it anymore, you know? So they're going to have to shut down, you know? Stonewall is going to have to die, because the number one gay rights issue is going to be supporting people who got heart washed and convinced and groomed into having sex change medical treatment that was totally unnecessary. And I totally regret it and realize that this has been a massive mistake. This is going to be a huge, so you cannot have the same organizations turn around, you know? So it's going to have to be new organizations coming up, you know? I hope Bev and Kate are ready, because there's going to be a lot of work to do, you know?
Well,
and Aaron Kimberly and the Gender Dysphoria Alliance and all of them.
That's the biggest change. So I was on the management team at LGB Alliance for a while last year, when my work capacity allowed me, and I haven't been able to do as much, but still being a supporter. And I think that's the big difference now from even 6 months ago, definitely a year ago, is that while Bev and Kate have founded it, it's not just Bev and Kate. There's a team of trustees, there's a team of volunteers, there's Kate Barker now as the managing director. There's a whole, beyond the management team of volunteers, there's a whole army of volunteers. And it's like, Kate and Bev have done a fantastic job of getting stuff going. But actually now they've recruited an army, and there's some, you know, it's definitely a charity that punches above its weight, because it is relatively small, but it's also, there's quite a lot of people there still now, and it's a legitimate proper charity, despite what mermaids and more.
Yeah, like these people are they're so, yeah, like we need this. We need gay rights organizations to come back. We need charities, lobby groups, activist organizations to advocate. That's the word I've been looking for this whole time. Advocacy organizations on behalf of same-sex attracted people. We can't just talk about Q and T all day long. Lesbians, gays, and bisexuals have a new crisis coming at us, which is actually a direct result of putting the T and the Q on the LGB, you know? So, yeah.
I've just ordered my t-shirt with the Stonewalled UK, the kind of parody Twitter account, I think, tweeted it, and it's like the dotted line with the scissors and the LGB on one side and the TQI plus on the other side. And I've ordered my one of them. I think that's it. My current focus in this, while still standing with women and supporting the broader stuff, is my particular focus is peaking more gay men, because I think that's a group that will help shift things.
Absolutely.
Once we fix the main problem, then I think my priority area is going to be the divorce, because this needs to be two separate.
I make no bones about it. We need more people like us addressing gay men, trying to lobby gay men, to advocate gay men. You know, we obviously support all of the other groups that are impacted by what's going on here: trans people, women, lesbians. But you know, I make no bones about the fact that I should be prioritizing trying to get more gay men involved.
And I think that's the beauty of, it's not a movement, but it's a collection of people. And like Posey Parker's really clear. She has nothing against gay men, but she's not there to advocate for gay men. She's got a very specific focus and approach that is doing great things. And that alongside that, you've got what Sex Matters is doing in a workplace-based thing, you know, what LGB Alliance are doing. So yeah, I think we don't all have to do everything for everyone. We're all fighting a common enemy, and we're all bringing different strands to that. And I think the piece that I feel a responsibility to do something about is peaking more gay men, and that's a focus.
And I think it's doable. You know, it's doable.
Yes.
we can be reached.
I'm glad we kind of got to a positive to end on rather than too much anything depressing. It's been so lovely chatting to you. I'm sure we'll do this again at some point in the future. So thank you to Arty. Thank you to everyone for watching. Hopefully part 1 and part 2. If you've just watched this one and not watched part 1, go and watch part 1. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you all again soon. Thanks, Arty.
Thanks so much, James. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much. Cheers.